As It Was by Tuesday Love Sang Rampa. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Book 2, The First Era, Chapter 4. "Oh, love sang, quoth Mother, her face pale with anger. "You have brought us absolute disgrace. I'm ashamed of you. Your father is ashamed of you. He's so angry with you, he's gone to the office. He'll be there all day, and that has upset all my engagements, and it's all you, Lob sang." So saying, she turned abruptly and hurried off as if she couldn't bear to look at me any longer. Ashamed of me? Why should she be ashamed of me? I didn't want to be a monk. I didn't want all the horrible things predicted for me. Anyone with a grain of sense would know that. The predictions of yesterday had filled me with horror. It had been like the ice devils trailing their fingers up and down my spine. So she was ashamed of me, was she? Old Sue hove into sight almost like a moving mountain. He was so large. He looked at me and said, "Well, young man, you're going to have a rough life, aren't you? I think you'll make it. If you could not have stood all the strains and temptations, you would not have been chosen for such a task. The craftsman chooses his tools according to the task to be done. Perhaps, who knows, the craftsman who chose you to be his instrument may have chosen better than he knew." I looked at old Sue somewhat cheered, but only somewhat, and then I said, "But, Sue, how have I disgraced Mother? How have I disgraced Father? I haven't done anything. I didn't want to become a monk. I just don't understand what they mean. Everyone today seems to be full of hate for me. My sister won't speak to me. My mother reviles me. My father won't even stay in the house with me, and I don't know why." Old Sue painfully lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the floor. His wounds inflicted by the British were sorely troubling him. He had had damage to a hip bone, and now, well, he had pain all the time. But he sat on the floor and talked to me. "Your mother," he said, "is a woman of great social ambition. She thought that as a son of a prince of Tibet, later to be a prince in your own right, you would have gone to a big city in India, and there you would have learned much of the affairs of the world. Your mother thought that you would be a social asset to her. She thought that if you went to India and perhaps to other countries, then she could also have gone on visits, and that for years, even before your birth, has been her all-consuming ambition. And now you have been chosen for a special task, but that's not what she wanted. It's not what your father wanted. They wanted a shining figure in the political arena, a socialite, not a monk who is going to have to struggle all his life, not a man who would wander the face of the earth like a pariah, shunned by his fellows for telling the truth, ostracized by those around him because he was trying to do a task at which others have failed." Old Sue snorted loudly. All this seemed too utterly strange for belief. Why should I be penalized, victimized, for something I hadn't done, and something I didn't want to do? All I wanted was to hang around the banks of the river and watch the ferrymen with their skin boats poling their way across the waters. All I wanted was to practice with my stilts and to fly my kites, but now, well, I just did not know what to make of things. I did not know why it had to be me. The days sped all too quickly, and at last, as foretold, I had to leave my home and go up the hill to the Shakpori lamasery. There I had to undergo the ordeal of waiting outside the cynosure of all eyes. Small boys clustered around me as I sat cross-legged in the dust outside the great gates. The days were unendurably long, but I had endured. The nights were unbearably tedious, but I bore them until at last that ordeal ended. I was admitted to the lamasery as the lowest of the low, a new boy, one who was fair game, and one who was there to be picked on, who could have any manner of joke played upon him. Yes, the lowest of the low. Time crawled, and I was homesick. I missed my home. I missed Sue. I missed my sister, Yasodhara, for the mother who now had no love for me as well. I had strange sensations about her. Frankly, I missed her. Even more frankly, I felt guilty. How had I failed? Why were they so disappointed with me? How could I help that an astrologer had said I should go and suffer this and endure that? It wasn't my choice. No one in their right senses, I thought, would pick up such a load of trouble as that which had been allocated to me. I thought of my father the last time I saw him before leaving home. He looked at me frozen-faced. He spoke to me harshly as if I were a stranger now, no longer with a home of my own, and no longer with parents of my own. He treated me more severely than he would have treated a convict who came to the door begging for food. He told me that I had disgraced the family by having had such karma, that I had to be a monk, a lama, a wanderer, who would be mocked, sneered at, and disbelieved. Yasodhara, well, I just didn't know what to make of her attitude. She changed. We used to play together like any normal brother and sister. We used to get on passably well, just, in fact, like normal brothers and sisters do get on passably well. But now she gave me such strange glances, as if I were a stray dog that had crept into the house and left an unwanted gift in some corner. The servants no longer showed me respect, the respect due to the heir of the Lalu estates. To them I was just something which was lodged there for a few days until the 7th birth-date should come. Then on the 7th birth-date I would wander off alone without a word of goodbye from anyone, up the long and lonely path leading toward a career which I would not have wished upon my worst enemies. At Shakpori there was the constant reek of drying herbs, the constant swish of herbal tea. Here much time was devoted to the herbalist code, and less time to religious disciplines. But we had very good tutors, all of them elderly men. Some, in fact, had even been as far away as India. I remember one elderly monk, or should I say lama, who was giving us a lecture, and then he got on to the subject of transmigration. In the days of long ago, he said, in fact, long before recorded history began, giants walked upon the earth. They were the gardeners of the earth, those who came here to supervise the development of life on this planet, because we are not the first round of existence here, you know. But like gardeners clearing a plot of land, all life had been removed, and then we, the human race, had been left here to make our own way, to make our own development. He stopped and looked around to see if his pupils were at all interested in the subject which he was propounding. To his gratified astonishment, he found that people were indeed deeply interested in his remarks. The race of giants, he went on, were not very suitable for life on earth, and so by magical means the race of giants shrank until they were the same size as humans. Thus they were able to mingle with humans without being recognized as the gardeners. But it was often necessary for a different senior gardener to come and carry out special tasks. It took too long to have a boy born to a woman and then wait out the years of his babyhood and childhood and teenage, so the science of the gardeners of the earth had a different system. They grew bodies and made sure that those bodies would be compatible with the spirit who would later inhabit them. A boy sitting in the front suddenly spoke up. How could a spirit inhabit another person? The Lama teacher smiled upon him and said, I was just about to tell you, but the gardeners of the earth permitted certain men and women to mate so that a child was born to each, and the growth of that child would be most carefully supervised throughout. Perhaps the first 15 or 20 or 30 years of life. Then there would come a time when a highly placed gardener would need to come to earth within a matter of hours, so helpers would place the trained body into a trance, into stasis, or if you like, into a state of suspended animation. Helpers in the astral world would come to the living body together with the entity who wanted to go to earth. With their special knowledge, they could detach the silver cord and connect in its place the silver cord of the entity who was the gardener of the earth, coming to the earth. The host would then become the vehicle of the gardener of the earth, and the astral body of the host would go away to the astral world, just as he would do in the case of a person who had died. This is called transmigration, the migration of one entity into the body of another. The body taken over is known as the host, and it has been known throughout history. It was practiced extensively in Egypt, and it gave rise to what is known as embalming, because in those days in Egypt there were quite a number of bodies kept in a state of suspended animation. They were living but unmoving. They were ready for occupancy by higher entities, just as we keep ponies waiting for a monk or lama to mount the animal and ride off somewhere. "Oh my!" exclaimed one boy. I expect friends of the host were mightily surprised when the body awakened, and the one they had thought of as their friend in the past was possessed of all knowledge. My, I wouldn't like to be a host. It must be a terrible feeling to have someone else take over one's body. The teacher laughed and said, "It would certainly be a unique experience. People still do it. Bodies are still prepared, specially raised, so that if the need arises, a different entity can take over a fresh body if it becomes necessary for the good of the world as a whole." For days after, the boys had discussed it, and in the way of boys, some of them pretended that they were going to be taking over bodies. But to me, thinking back on that dread prediction, it was no joke. It wasn't amusing to me. It was an ordeal to even think about it. It was a continual shock to my system, so great a shock that at times I thought I would go insane. One tutor, in particular, was intrigued by my love of cats, and the cats' obvious love for me. The tutor knew full well that cats and I conversed telepathically. One day, after school hours, he was in a very good mood indeed, and he saw me lying on the ground with 4 or 5 of our temple cats sitting on me. He laughed at the sight, and bade me accompany him to his room, which I did with some apprehension, because in those days a summons to a lama's quarters usually meant a reprimand for something done or not done, or extra tasks to be accomplished. So I followed him at a respectful distance, and once in his rooms he told me to sit down while he talked to me about cats. "Cats," he said, "are now small creatures, and they cannot speak in the human tongue, but only by telepathy. Many, many years ago, before this particular round of existence, cats populated the earth. They were bigger. They were almost as big as our ponies. They talked to each other. They could do things with their forepaws, which then they called hands. They engaged in horticulture, and they were largely vegetarian cats. They lived among the trees, and their houses were in the great trees. Some of those trees were very different from those we now know upon the earth. Some of them, in fact, had great hollows in them, like caves, and in those hollows, or caves, the cats made their homes. They were warm. They were protected by the living entity of the tree, and altogether they were a very congenial community. But one cannot have perfection with any species because, unless there is some competition, unless there is some dissatisfaction to spur one on, then the creature having such euphoria degenerates. He smiled at the cats who had followed me and who were now sitting around me, and then he went on. "Such happened to our brothers and sisters' cat. They were too happy, too contented. They had nothing to spur their ambition, nothing to drive them on to greater heights. They had no thought except that they were happy. They were like those poor people we saw recently who were bereft of sanity. They were content to just lie beneath the trees and let the affairs of the day take care of themselves. They were static, and so being static, they were a failure. As such, the gardeners of the earth rooted them out as though they were weeds, and the earth was allowed to lie fallow for a time. And in the course of time, the earth had reached such a stage of ripeness that again it could be restocked with a different type of entity. But the cats, well, their fault had been that they had done nothing, neither good nor bad. They had existed, and that alone existed, and so they were sent down again as small creatures, like those we see here. They were sent to learn a lesson. They were sent with the inner knowledge that they had once been the dominant species. So they were reserved, very careful to whom they gave their friendship. They were sent to do a task, the task of watching humans and reporting the progress or the failures of humans, so that when the next round came, much information would have been provided by cats. Cats can go anywhere. They can see anything. They can hear anything. And, not being able to tell a lie, they would record everything precisely as it occurred. I know that I was quite frightened for the time being. I wondered what the cats were reporting about me. But then, one old Tom, a champion of many a fight, gave a "Arr!" and jumped on my shoulders and butted his head against mine, so I knew everything was all right, and they would not report me too badly. Some time after, I lay upon my face on my blanket, on the floor of the infirmary, because I had been very badly burned at the top of my leg. The scars are with me yet, and the dysfunction occasioned by the burn is one from which I still suffer. I was lying upon my face, because I couldn't lie upon my back, and a well-loved lama entered and said, "Later, Lobsang, when you are healed and mobile, I'm going to take you to a certain peak in the mountains. I have there something to show you, because, you know, the earth has undergone many changes. The earth has changed, the seas have altered, and the mountains have grown. I'm going to show you things which not more than 10 people in the whole of Tibet have seen during the past 100 years. So hurry up and get better. Hurry up and heal. You have something of interest before you." It was some months later when my guide, the Lama Mingyar Dondap, who meant so much to me, and who was more than a mother, father, and brother to me, led me along a path. He went a few feet ahead on a strong horse, and I rode behind him on a pony that was as wary of me as I was of him. He recognized me as a bad rider, and I recognized him as a horse who recognized a bad rider. We had what in later years I would have called armed neutrality, a sort of, well, if you don't do anything, I won't either. We've got to live together somehow. But we rode on, and at long last my guide stopped. I leaned over and slithered sideways off the pony. The trail ropes were dropped, and the horse and pony would not then wander away. They were too well trained. My guide lit a fire, and we sat down to a very sparse supper. There was desultory talk for a time about the wonders of the heavens spread out above us. We were in the shadow of the mountains, and strong purple patches of darkness were sweeping across the valley of Lhasa as the sun sank down beyond the western range. At last all was dark, except for the faint twinkling butter lamps from a myriad of houses and lamaseries, and except for the glory of the heavens above, which sent forth their faint twinkling speckles of light. At last my guide said to me, "Now we must go to sleep, Lobsang. There are no temple services tonight to disturb you. No temple services in the morning for which you have to awaken. Sleep well, for on the morrow we shall see things that you have never before dreamed possible." So saying, he rolled himself up in his blanket, turned on his side, and went to sleep just like that. I lay for a time trying to scoop a hole in the rock, because my hip bones seemed to stick out a long way. And then I turned on my face, for my scars were still causing pain, and then I too eventually went to sleep. The morning dawned bright. From our altitude in the mountains, it was fascinating to watch how the early morning rays of the sun seemed to shoot horizontally across the valley and illuminate the peaks on the western horizon with what appeared to be golden fingers of fire. Indeed, for a time it looked as if the whole mountain range was afire. We stood and watched, and then simultaneously we turned and smiled at each other. After a light breakfast, we watered the horses at a small mountain stream, and then, providing them with ample forage, which, of course, we had brought with us, we tied them together with about 30 feet space between them. They had plenty of room in which to roam and graze off the sparse grass. The lama Mingyar Dondap led the way up the trackless mountainside. By an immense boulder which seemed set immovably into the cliff face, he turned and said, "In your travels you are going to see much which appears to be magic, Lobsang. Here is a first sample of it." Then he turned, and to my horrified amazement, he wasn't there any longer. He just disappeared in front of my eyes. Then his voice came from somewhere, bidding me to step forward. As I did so, I found that what appeared to be a strip of moss hanging on the cliff face was, in fact, some loose lianes. I approached, and the lama held the fronds aside for me so that I might enter. He turned, and I followed him, gazing about me in awe. This seemed to be a wide, wide tunnel, and light was coming in from some source which I could not discern. I followed his receding footsteps, chiding myself for my tardiness, for, as I well realized, if I was going to be too slow, I might get lost in this mountain tunnel. For a time we walked on, sometimes in pitch darkness, where I had to feel with a hand lightly brushing the wall on one side. I was not bothered about pits or low-hanging rocks, because my guide was very much larger than I, and if he had room, well then, there would be room for me. After some 30 minutes of walking, sometimes in a stifling dead air atmosphere, and sometimes in a bracing mountain breeze, we came to what appeared to be a lighted area. My guide stopped. I stopped too when I reached him and looked about me. I caught my breath in astonishment. This seemed to be a large chamber, I suppose 50 or 60 feet across, and on the walls there were strange carvings, carvings which I failed to understand. It seemed to be very strange people dressed in remarkable clothing, which appeared to cover them from head to foot, or, more accurately, from neck to foot, because on their heads they had a representation of what seemed to be a transparent globe. Above us, as I looked up, there seemed to be an immense cube, and at the end of that I could just discern a fleecy cloud floating by. My guide broke into my thoughts. "This is a very strange area, Lobsang," he told me. "Thousands and thousands of years ago there was a mighty civilization upon this earth. It was known as the time of Atlantis. Some of the people of the Western world, to which in later years you will go, think of Atlantis as a legend, as an imaginary place dreamed up by some great storyteller. Well," he mused, "to my regret, I have to tell you that many people will think that you have dreamed up your own true experiences. But never mind how much you are doubted, never mind how much you are disbelieved, you know the truth, you will live the truth, and here in this chamber you have the proof that there was Atlantis." He turned and led the way yet further into this strange tunnel. For a time we walked in absolute inky darkness, our breath coming hard in the stale, dead air. Then again there came the freshness. From somewhere a pleasant breeze was blowing. The deadness vanished, and soon we saw a glimmer of light ahead of us. I could see my guide's figure bulking in the tunnel, outlined by light ahead of me. Now, with fresh air in my lungs, I hurried to catch up with him. Again he stopped in a large chamber. Here there were more strange things. Someone had apparently carved great shelves in the rock, and on those shelves there were strange artifacts which were without any meaning whatever to me. I looked at them and gently touched some of these things. They seemed to me to be machines. There were great discs with strange grooves on them. Some of the discs appeared to be of stone, and they were perhaps 6 feet across, with an undulating wave on their surface, and in the center of the disc a hole. It meant nothing to me, so I turned from fruitless speculation and examined the paintings and carvings which adorned the walls. They were strange pictures: large cats that walked on 2 legs, tree houses with curled cats inside. There were things which seemed to be floating in the air, and below, on what was obviously the ground, humans were pointing upwards at these things. It was all so much above me that it made my head ache. My guide said, "These are passages which reach to the ends of the earth. The earth has a spine, just as we have, Lobsang, but the spine of the earth is of rock. In our spine we have a tunnel. It is filled with liquid in our case, and our spinal cord goes through. Here, this is the spine of the earth, and this tunnel was man-made in the days of Atlantis, when they knew how to make rock flow like water without generating heat. "Look at this rock," he said, turning and rapping on a wall. "This rock is fused to almost total hardness. If you take a great stone and slam it against this rock face, you would do no harm whatever except to the stone, which may shatter. I have traveled extensively, and I know that this rocky spine extends from the North Pole to the South Pole." He motioned that we should sit, so we sat cross-legged upon the floor right beneath the hole which extended up to the open air, and through which we could see the darkness of the sky. "Lab Sang," said my guide, "there are many things on this earth which people do not understand. There are things inside this earth too, because, contrary to the common belief, the earth is indeed hollow, and there is another race of people living inside this earth. They are more developed than we are, and sometimes some of them come out of the earth in special vehicles." He stopped and pointed to one of the strange things in the pictures, and then he continued, "These vehicles come out of the earth, and they fly around on the outside of the earth to see what people are doing, and to ascertain if their own safety is jeopardized by the folly of those whom they term the outsiders." Inside the earth, I thought. What a strange place to be living. It must be frightfully dark down there. I don't like the thought of living in the dark. A butter lamp is such a comfort. My guide laughed at me as he picked up my thoughts, and he said, "Oh, it's not dark inside the earth," Lab Sang. "They have a sun, something like we have here, but theirs is much smaller and very much more powerful. They have much more than we have. They are very much more intelligent. But in the days before you shall know more about the people of the inner earth. Come." He rose to his feet and went off through a tunnel which I had not seen, a tunnel diverging to the right. It sloped down, down. We seemed to walk endlessly in darkness. Then my guide bade me stop where I was. I could hear him fiddling and fumbling about, and there was a clatter that sounded like a rock being moved. Then there were a few sparks as he struck the flint upon steel. There came a dull glow as the tinder ignited. He blew upon it, and then as the tinder burst into small flame, he thrust the end of some sort of stick into the flame, where it burst into brilliant light. He held this torch at arm's length, slightly above him, and called me to come to his side. I did so, and he pointed to the wall in front of us. The tunnel ended, and in front of us was an absolutely smooth, impenetrable surface which gleamed brightly in the flickering light of the flare. "That," Lab Sang, said my guide, "is as hard as diamond. In fact, some of us came here years ago with a diamond, and we tried to scratch the surface, and we ruined the diamond. This is a passage which leads to the world inside. It was sealed, we believe, by the inside worlders to save their civilization during a great flood which struck this earth. We believe that if this was opened, that is, if we could open it, people would come pouring out and overwhelm us for daring to intrude upon their privacy. We of the higher Lama class have often visited this place and tried to commune with those below by telepathy. They have received our messages, but they want nothing to do with us. They tell us that we are warlike, that we are as ignorant children trying to blow up the world, trying to ruin peace. They tell us by telepathy that they are keeping check on us, and if necessary, they will intervene. So, we can go no further here. This is the end. This is the blocked line between the upper and the inner worlds. All right, we will go back to our chamber. He carefully extinguished the flare, and we felt our way back to where the glowing light from the sky above shone down through the hole in the roof. In that chamber, again, the Lama pointed in another direction and said, "If we had the strength and the time, we could walk right away to the South Pole by following that tunnel. Some of us have covered miles and miles, bringing ample food with us and camping by night, or what we deem to be night. We traveled endless miles over 6 months, and at times we came up through a tunnel and found that we were in a strange land. Indeed, but we dared not show ourselves. Always the exits were very, very carefully camouflaged." We sat down and ate our small meal. We had been traveling a long time, and exhaustion was setting in for me, although my guide seemed to be immune from exhaustion or even ordinary tiredness. He talked to me and told me all manner of things. He said, "When I was being trained as you are being trained now, I too went through the ceremony of the small death, and I was shown the Akashic record. I was shown the things that had been, and I saw that our Tibet was once a pleasant watering place beside a glittering sea. The temperatures were warm, perhaps even excessively so, and there was profuse foliage and palm trees and all manner of strange fruits, which then meant nothing at all to me. But from the Akashic record I saw a truly wondrous civilization. I saw strange craft in the sky. I saw people with remarkable cone-shaped heads who walked about, who had their entertainments, who made love but also made war. Then, as I saw in this record, the whole country shook, and the sky turned black. The clouds were as dark as night, their undersides lit with flickering flames. The land shuttered and opened. It seemed that everything was fire. Then the sea rushed into the newly opened land, and there were tremendous explosions. Explosion after explosion. It seemed that the sun stood still, and the moon rose no more. People were becoming overwhelmed by tremendous floods of water. People were being seared to death by flames, which appeared from I know not where. But the flames flickered with a vile purplish glow, and as they touched people, the flesh fell from their bones, leaving the skeletons to fall to the ground with a clatter. Day succeeded day, and the turmoil increased, although one would have said that such a thing was impossible. And then there came a ripping, searing explosion, and everything turned dark. Everything was as black as the soot which comes from too many butter lamps burning untrimmed. After a time, which I could not calculate, he said, the gloom became lighter, the darkness was diminishing, and when the light of day finally appeared, after I know not how long, I looked at the picture with utter terror. Now I found that I was looking at a vastly different landscape. The sea was no more. A ring of mountains had sprung up in the darkness and encircled what previously had been the city of a most high civilization. I looked about me in fascinated horror. The sea had gone. The sea, well, there was no more sea. Instead there were mountains, and ring upon ring of mountains. Now I could tell that we were thousands of feet higher, and although I was seeing the Akashic record, I was sensing as well. I could sense the rarity of the air. There was no sign of life here, no sign whatsoever. And as I looked, the picture vanished, and I found myself back from whence I had started, in the deepest levels of the mountain of Potala, where I had been undergoing the ceremony of the little death, and given much information. For a time we sat there meditating upon the past, and my guide said to me, "I see you are meditating, or attempting to meditate. Now, there are two very good ways of meditating, Lobsang. You must be content. You must be tranquil. You cannot meditate with a disturbed mind, and you cannot meditate with a whole gathering of people. You have to be alone, or with just one person whom you love." He regarded me and then said, "You must always look at something black, or at something which is white. If you look at the ground, you may be distracted by a grain of pebble, or you may be doubly distracted by some insect. To meditate successfully, you must always gaze at that which offers no attraction to the eye, either entire black or pure white. Your eyes then become sick of the whole affair, and become, as it were, disassociated from the brain. So then, the brain, having nothing to distract it optically, is free to obey what your subconscious requires, and thus, if you have instructed your subconscious that you are going to meditate, meditate you will. You will find in that sort of meditation that your senses are heightened, your perceptions more acute, and that is the only meditation worthy of the name. In the years which will come to you, you will encounter many cults proffering meditation at a price, but that is not meditation as we understand it, nor is it meditation as we want it. It is just something which cultists play with, and it has no virtue." So saying, he rose to his feet, exclaiming, "We must get back, for the day is far advanced. We shall have to spend another night in the mountains, for it is too late to start off for Shakpori." He set off down the tunnel, and I jumped to my feet and scurried after him. I had no desire to be left in this place, where inside-worlders, or whatever they like to call themselves, could perhaps pop up and take me down with them. I did not know what they would be like. I did not know how they would like me, and I certainly did not want to stay alone in the dark of that place, so I hurried, and at last we reached again that entrance by which we entered. The horse and the pony were resting peacefully, and we sat down beside them, made our simple preparations for our meal. The light was already far gone. Much of the valley was in darkness. At our altitude the western sun was yet shining upon us, but the orb itself was dipping ever more deeply beneath the mountains on its path to illumine other parts of the world before returning to us. After some small talk, we rolled ourselves in our blankets again and committed ourselves to sleep. End of chapter 4.